You ever notice how you can be smart and still keep losing? Not just money, time, energy, confidence. Because the truth is, most people don't fail from lack of knowledge. They fail from bad judgment under pressure. They chase hype. They panic early. They trust feelings over facts. Then they call it bad luck. This video is going to fix that. We're breaking down the real psychological blueprint behind security analysis, the legendary book written after the Great Depression by Benjamin Graham and David Dodd. A book that wasn't just about stocks, it was about human weakness. And by the end of this video, you'll learn how to separate price from value, in money and in life, how the crowd manipulates your decisions without you noticing, why your ego is your biggest financial enemy, how to build a margin of safety so one mistake doesn't destroy you, and how to think like a calm strategist in a world addicted to noise. This might sound harsh, but if you don't learn this, the world will keep pricing your emotions. So stay with me, because what you're about to hear isn't motivation, it's protection. Chapter 1. You think you're safe, but you're just unaware. Have you ever asked yourself why you feel calm right before everything falls apart? You call it peace, but maybe it's just comfort, and comfort can be dangerous. Security Analysis was written by Benjamin Graham and David Dodd in 1934, two men who watched the Great Depression tear illusions apart. They did not write to impress. They wrote because people believed stories over numbers, hope over evidence, charm over structure. They saw how emotion dressed itself as intelligence. So they built a method, cold, careful, unromantic. They said, do not buy a promise, buy proof. Do not trust excitement, trust margin. This was not just about money. It was about the human mind under pressure. In 1979, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky discovered through prospect theory that people fear loss more than they value gain. That fear bends logic. It makes you hold what you should cut, chase what you should ignore. Loss aversion is not a market flaw. It is your flaw. You think you're rational, but you are attached. Graham understood something deeper. The market is a mirror. It reflects crowd psychology, panic, greed, denial. You are not fighting numbers. You are fighting yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. That is security, not prediction, but preparation. So let me ask you directly, are you building your life on intrinsic value or on market applause? This might sound harsh, but most people don't want truth. They want reassurance. Security is not comfort. It is discipline under uncertainty, and uncertainty is the only guarantee. If you don't analyze your own impulses, the world will price them for you, and it won't be generous. Chapter 2. You keep paying full price for a beautiful lie. Have you noticed how fast your brain falls in love with a good idea? Not a proven idea, not a tested one, just a good-sounding one. This is where security analysis gets almost cruel, because Graham and Dodd kept repeating one principle in different forms. Price is not value, and most people never learn that. They confuse expensive with important. They confuse popular with real. In the market, that mistake costs money. In life, it costs years. Graham and Dodd wrote about intrinsic value, the value underneath the noise, the value that still stands when the crowd stops clapping. They pushed a mindset that felt boring to most people, because it required patience, and patience is the one virtue modern life keeps trying to delete. In 2001, psychologist Shane Frederick and colleagues developed the cognitive reflection test and found something uncomfortable. Many people don't fail because they are stupid. They fail because they answer too fast. Their first impulse feels correct, so they stop thinking. That's the trap. Your first thought is often just a reflex, and reflex is not wisdom. Nietzsche warned about this in his own way. The herd doesn't just shape culture. It shapes your instincts, so you start wanting what everyone wants, even when it doesn't fit your soul. This might sound devilish, but marketing is basically applied hypnosis. Not magic, just repetition. So you end up buying the same lie in different forms. A job title, a relationship, a lifestyle, person's approval. You pay full price for something that never had real value? Graham's answer was simple: demand a margin of safety. In investing, it means don't buy unless you're protected from being wrong. In life, it means don't commit unless reality can support it. Ask yourself, if the excitement died tomorrow, would this still be worth it? If the attention vanished, would you still want it? Because if your value depends on noise, then you're not living. You're speculating. And speculation always feels good right before it breaks you. Chapter 3. You are not investing. You are gambling with your ego. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. When you take risks, are you calculating? Or are you trying to prove something? Be honest. Graham and Dodd made a brutal distinction. Investment is based on analysis, safety of principle, and adequate return. Anything else, they said, is speculation. Most people read that line and nod. Then they go back to gambling. Not just in markets, in relationships, in careers, in reputation. Speculation is emotional. It's driven by excitement, fear of missing out, the rush of being early, the pride of being right. It feeds the ego, and the ego loves volatility, because volatility gives it drama. In 1998, Terence O'Dean studied trading behavior and found that individual investors trade too much. And the more they trade, the worse they perform. Overconfidence was the silent engine. They believed they were above average. Most were not. This is not a market issue. This is a psychological infection. You don't want returns. You want validation. Sun Tzu said that every battle is won before it is fought. He meant preparation, positioning, clarity. But you walk into battles just to feel alive. You call it boldness. Sometimes it's just insecurity in motion. Overconfidence bias is dangerous because it feels like strength. But strength without discipline becomes recklessness. Graham's method was almost stoic in nature. Assume you can be wrong. Protect yourself from that possibility. Build systems that survive your own mistakes. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself daily. Not because he lacked intelligence, but because he distrusted his impulses. That is maturity. So ask yourself, are you building a strategy or chasing a thrill? Because one compounds quietly, the other collapses loudly. You don't lose because the world is cruel. You lose because you confuse emotion with insight. And emotion, unchecked, will always gamble with your future. Chapter 4. You're not studying the asset, you're studying the crowd. Have you ever noticed how your certainty rises? Right when everyone agrees with you? That's not confidence. That's contamination. Graham and Dodd warned, again and again, that markets are not voting machines forever. But in the short term, they are. The crowd decides what feels true. And most people mistake that feeling for reality. This is where the danger becomes subtle. You stop analyzing the thing and start analyzing the reaction to the thing. You begin to track trends, headlines, sentiment, hype, not because you're strategic, but because you're afraid to stand alone. In 1954, Solomon Asch ran his conformity experiments and found that people will knowingly give wrong answers just to match the group. Not because they're weak, because social rejection feels like death to the nervous system. So when the crowd is excited, you feel excited. When the crowd panics, you feel panic. And you call it intuition. That's not intuition. That's herd behavior. This might sound dark, but most people don't want to win. They want to belong. And belonging is expensive. Costs you independent thought. Machiavelli understood this from the political side. People follow appearances, not truth. They reward the one who looks strong, not the one who is correct. Markets do the same thing. Social media does it faster. Graham's antidote was almost insulting in its simplicity. Do the work. Read the statements. Understand the business. Separate fact from narrative. Assume the crowd is emotional, because it is. Stoicism urges the same posture. Do not let other minds invade your mind. So ask yourself, when you want something badly, is it because it's valuable or because everyone else wants it too? Because the crowd can't give you security. The crowd can only give you noise. And if you build your decisions on noise, your life will sound loud and still go nowhere. Chapter 5. You don't fear risk, you fear looking wrong. Let me ask you straight, do you avoid danger or do you avoid embarrassment? Because those are not the same. Graham and Dodd treated risk like an adult treats fire, not with panic, with respect. They didn't define risk as volatility. They defined it as the probability of permanent loss. That's a different mindset. It forces you to stop asking, how much can I make? And start asking, how can I survive? Most people never do that. They don't build protection. They build hope. In 1968, psychologists John Darley and Bibb Latané discovered the bystander effect. People hesitate to act when others are watching because responsibility feels shared. But there's a quieter cousin to that. People also hesitate to act because they fear being judged for acting alone. So you freeze. You hold the losing position. You stay in the failing relationship. You keep the dead routine. Not because you believe in it, but because leaving would admit you were wrong. Pride can be more expensive than loss. Nietzsche said that many people would rather will nothingness than not will at all. That's what this looks like. You'd rather stay in a bad direction than face the silence of correction. Graham's margin of safety wasn't just a financial buffer. It was psychological armor. It gave you permission to be wrong without being destroyed. That's the real lesson. Stoicism says, don't demand control. Demand clarity. You cannot control outcomes, but you can control exposure. So ask yourself, where in your life are you overexposed? Where have you bet too much of your identity on one thing? Because the most dangerous risk is not losing money. It's losing your ability to adjust. And if you can't adjust, you're not living. You're just waiting for impact. The video is half finished. If you like the video, be sure to comment and watch the next steps. Chapter 6. You're not broke. You're over-leveraged in illusion. Let me ask you quietly, if everything stopped today, would you still stand? Or are you stretched thin? Held together by momentum and image? Graham and Dodd spoke clearly about leverage. Borrowed money magnifies gains. Yes, but it also magnifies error. A small mistake becomes fatal when you have no cushion. That's finance. Now look at your life. How much of it is borrowed? Borrowed status, borrowed confidence, borrowed identity. You build on expectations, not foundations. And when the pressure rises, you call it bad luck. It's not luck, it's structure. In 2002, Kahneman discovered what he called the focusing illusion. Nothing is as important as you think it is while you're thinking about it. When you fixate on one outcome, you overcommit, you overexpose, you distort proportion. That's leverage of attention. And attention, when misused, becomes a debt. Leverage feels powerful at first, feels like speed. But speed without base is collapse waiting politely. Seneca warned that fortune is like glass. It shines brightest right before it shatters. He wasn't speaking only about wealth. He meant dependence. When your peace depends on one source, you are fragile. Graham's discipline was simple. Build margin before ambition. Strength before expansion. Liquidity before luxury. Stoicism echoes it. Train for loss, not in fear, in readiness. So I'll ask you directly, what are you over-leveraged in? Approval? Income? A single skill? A single person? Because if one shock can erase you, you were never stable. You were inflated. Security is not how high you... Chapter 7. You want control, but you avoid reality. Let me ask you something sharp. Do you actually want truth, or do you want control? Because those two often fight each other. Graham and Dodd insisted on one discipline that most people secretly hate. Face the numbers as they are. No storytelling. No smoothing the edges. Just facts. Earnings. Debt. Cash flow. Structure. They understood something simple. Reality does not negotiate. But you do. You reinterpret signals. You delay decisions. You soften warnings. In 1976, psychologist Neil Weinstein discovered what he called unrealistic optimism. People consistently believe negative events are less likely to happen to them than to others. Not because they lack intelligence, because they crave control. Belief becomes anesthesia. You don't ignore risk because you're blind. You ignore it because fear threatens your self-image. Sun Tzu said, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles." But you rarely want to know yourself fully, because self-knowledge removes excuses. So instead of analyzing the structure, you analyze your feelings about the structure. That's not strategy. That's avoidance with vocabulary. Stoicism demands something harder. See things plainly. Strip events of drama. Call debt, debt. Call weakness, weakness. Call dependency, dependency. There is power in naming. Graham's method was not pessimistic. It was clean. He assumed markets could be irrational longer than you could remain solvent. That's humility, not fear. So ask yourself, where are you massaging the numbers in your own life? Health? Habits? Finances? Character? Because control built on distortion is temporary. Reality always audits. And when it does, it won't care how confident you sounded while denying it. Chapter 8. You don't need more information. You need better temperament. Let me ask you something that might sting. How much of your research is just anxiety dressed as intelligence? Because that's common. Graham and Dodd didn't worship information. They worshiped judgment. They understood that the market punishes the person who knows a lot but can't sit still. The best analysis in the world means nothing if your emotions hijack the final decision. That's why security analysis feels less like a finance book and more like a training manual for temperament. In 1999, Roy Baumeister and his colleagues studied self-control and found something important. Willpower behaves like a limited resource. When people are mentally depleted, they make worse decisions, more impulsive, more short-term. So you can be smart and still act like a fool at the wrong moment. The problem is not your IQ, it's your inner stability. This might sound devilish, but modern life is designed to drain you. Notifications, outrage, comparison, endless content. Your nervous system stays slightly panicked, and panic wants quick relief. That's why you chase certainty. That's why you overtrade. That's why you keep checking. Stoicism doesn't tell you to be emotionless. It tells you to be ungoverned. There's a difference. Emotion can exist, but it shouldn't drive the wheel. Graham believed the intelligent investor is not the one with the best predictions, but the one with the best behavior. Nietzsche would call it strength of spirit, the ability to hold your direction when the world tries to pull you into noise. So ask yourself, when you make your biggest mistakes, is it because you lacked knowledge or because you couldn't tolerate discomfort? Because discomfort is the price of discipline, and discipline is the real margin of safety. Chapter 9. You say you're long-term, but you panic in the short term. Let me ask you honestly, if your plans take 10 years, why do your emotions move in 10 minutes? You say you believe in patience, but your behavior exposes urgency. Graham and Dodd built their entire framework on time, not speed, not timing the market, time. They understood that value unfolds slowly, like muscle under pressure. But the crowd wants movement, constant movement, and you get infected. In 1985, psychologist Ziva Kunda found that motivated reasoning shapes how we process information. When you want something to be true, your mind bends evidence to protect that desire. So when prices fall, you suddenly discover reasons to doubt. When prices rise, you suddenly discover reasons to believe. Your analysis shifts with your mood. That's not strategy. That's emotional weather. This might sound harsh, but most people don't fail because their plan is wrong. They fail because they abandon it at the first sign of discomfort. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Short-term volatility feels like catastrophe because you zoom in too close. You forget the horizon. Zoom out. Sun Tzu taught that prolonged warfare drains the state. In the same way, constant reaction drains your clarity. If you keep responding to every fluctuation, you lose the larger campaign. Graham's approach was grounded. Define your criteria before you enter. Decide your standard of value before emotion enters the room. Then act based on that structure, not based on noise. So let me press you. When you panic, what exactly are you protecting? Your capital or your ego? Because long-term thinking is not a slogan. It's a temperament tested by boredom, tested by fear, tested by silence. If you can't endure quiet uncertainty, you will always sell your future for present relief. And relief is expensive. Chapter 10. You want freedom, but you refuse responsibility. Let me end with this. Do you actually want security? Or do you want someone else to carry the weight of your choices? Because freedom without responsibility is fantasy. Graham and Dodd did not promise safety. They offered a method, a framework, a discipline. But discipline is heavy. It forces you to read what others ignore, to doubt your excitement, to question your fear, to stand apart from the crowd without applause. Most people don't want that burden. They want certainty. They want prediction. They want guarantees. But security analysis never gave guarantees. It gave responsibility. It said, if you are willing to analyze deeply, demand a margin of safety, and control your behavior, you tilt the odds. Not eliminate risk. Tilt it. That's mature thinking. In 1966, psychologist Julian Rotter introduced the idea of locus of control. He found that people with an internal locus believe outcomes are shaped largely by their own actions. Those with an external locus blame fate, luck, systems, other people. The difference is not intelligence. It's ownership. Blame feels lighter than responsibility, but it keeps you weak. This might sound severe, but if you always need the world to be fair before you act wisely, you will never act wisely. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, you cannot control events, only your judgments and actions. That's not passive. That's power refined. Security is not the absence of chaos. It is structure within chaos. It is knowing your principles before temptation arrives. It is limiting downside before chasing upside. It is staying rational when others swing between euphoria and despair. So I'll leave you with this. If your life were audited today, financially, emotionally, morally, would it show speculation or disciplined investment? Because in the end, the market is just a metaphor. The real asset under analysis is you. Thank you very much for watching my video, and please like and subscribe to my channel.